Language is the right word for what is being described here, and it is worth sitting with why before moving into what the language actually contains. Language implies communication, the transmission of something from one interior to another through a medium that both parties can receive. The avoidance medium is not words, is not the direct, emotionally transparent communication that most people default to when they want to be understood by someone they are close to. The avoidance medium is the quality of presence, the specific, felt, bodily registered quality of what it is like to be in the company of another person. What the nervous system reads before the mind has processed the content of what is being said, what arrives first, most deeply, most durably. Calm reaches the avoidant through this medium in a way that nothing else consistently does. Not because calm is more sophisticated or more skillfully deployed, because calm is the only quality of presence that the avoidance monitoring system, the continuous, largely involuntary assessment of intimacy pressure that runs beneath the surface of every interaction, does not register as a threat requiring management. Everything else that is directed at the avoidant, the love, the need, the frustration, the hope, the carefully worded expression of what you require, arrives through the medium of the other person's emotional state. And the other person's emotional state, when it is organized around the avoidance response, when it carries the weight of wanting something specific from the avoidant, generates the reading that activates the management. The calm that the avoidant actually understands, that actually reaches the interior rather than activating the defenses, is the calm that is not organized around them. That is not the calm of someone who wants something from them and is managing their presentation in service of the wanting. That is simply the calm of someone who is genuinely, constitutionally, self-generatingly settled, who is present in the interaction without the interaction being the source of their stability. The avoidant grew up in, or developed within, an emotional environment in which the emotional states of other people were the primary information requiring continuous processing, not always through overt drama or explicit instability, sometimes through the subtler, more insidious form of an environment in which the adult's emotional needs were larger than the child's emotional resources, in which attunement flowed in the wrong direction, in which the child learned to monitor the emotional weather of the people around them, because the monitoring was necessary for navigation, because the emotional state of the attachment figure determined what was safe, what was available, what the quality of the moment would be. This history produced an adult who is extraordinarily skilled at reading the emotional states of others and extraordinarily burdened by the reading. The skill is genuine, the avoidance perception of the emotional weather of a room, of an interaction, of the specific quality of another person's interior state beneath the surface of their presentation is often more accurate than the perception of people who did not develop this capacity under the same pressure. But the skill is attached to an automatic response that the child's environment made necessary and that the adult has not yet fully updated. The response is management. When the emotional state of another person is perceived, when the monitoring registers the weight of another person's need or hope or frustration or love directed at the avoidant specifically, the system responds with the protocol it developed in the original environment. Manage, regulate, assess the threat level, determine the appropriate distance, create the space required to prevent the other person's emotional state from becoming the avoidance problem to solve. This protocol operates automatically. It does not wait for conscious instruction. It runs in the background of every interaction, consuming resources, generating the distance that looks, from the outside, like indifference, but is, from the inside, the continuous operation of a protective system that has never been updated with the information that the original conditions no longer apply. Calm does not activate the protocol. This is the core of why it is the only language that consistently reaches the avoidant, not because it is more pleasant or more effective as a communication strategy, because it does not provide the input that the protocol requires to run. The protocol runs on the perception of another person's emotional state, as a demand, as weight, as something that requires the avoidance management to navigate. When the emotional state of the other person is calm, genuinely, constitutionally, not requiring anything from the avoidant calm, the demand reading does not occur. The weight is not registered, the management protocol is not activated, and in the absence of the protocol's activation, something becomes available that the protocol's running always crowds out. Actual presence. The avoidant's actual, unmanaged, genuine engagement with the person in front of them. The experience of the other person and the interaction that is not filtered through the continuous assessment of threat level and appropriate distance. The curiosity, the warmth, the real responsiveness of someone who is not, in this moment, spending the majority of their available resources on management. This is why conversations with a genuinely calm person feel different to the avoidant than conversations with people who are emotionally invested in the avoidance response. Not because the calm person is less interesting or less engaged, because the calm person is not generating the input that activates the avoidance most energy-consuming background process. The resources that would normally be allocated to management are available for the conversation itself, for the actual, real, present tense experience of engaging with another person without the continuous parallel processing of how to navigate the engagement's emotional implications. Calm communicates things to the avoidant that words cannot communicate, because the things that need to be communicated to reach the avoidant are not things that words can effectively carry. Words pass through the intellectual layer, where the avoidant's sophisticated processing can receive them, analyze them, and either integrate them or construct an intellectual response that gives the appearance of integration without producing the felt level shift that genuine integration requires. What needs to reach the avoidant is not information for the intellectual layer, it is information for the nervous system, for the monitoring system, for the background protocol that is making the decisions about distance and management that no amount of intellectually processed content can override, because the decisions are being made below the level where intellectual processing operates. Calm communicates to this level directly. It speaks the language of the nervous system, the language of co-regulation, of the bodily experience safety of proximity to someone whose state does not require monitoring because it carries no demand. The avoidance nervous system, however defended, is still a nervous system. It still has the capacity for co-regulation that all human nervous systems have. It still responds to the genuine calm of another person's system with something that, given sufficient time and sufficient consistency, begins to approximate settling. This settling is the ground on which everything else becomes possible, the conversation that goes deeper than the managed surface, the moment of genuine vulnerability that surfaces when the monitoring is not consuming the resources required for its suppression, the warmth that arrives above the calibrated level because the calibration is less vigilant when the monitoring is less active. The slow, imperfect, non-linear process of the avoidant beginning to associate specific persons and specific interactions with the experience of safety rather than with the experience of pressure requiring management. The calm that reaches the avoidant is not a communication strategy. This distinction cannot be made too many times because it is the distinction that separates the genuine from the performed, and the avoidance system is precisely calibrated to feel the difference. The performed calm, the deliberate management of one's own emotional presentation in order to produce a particular effect in the avoidant, is still organized around the avoidance response. The person performing it is still monitoring, still oriented toward what the avoidant is doing and whether the calm is producing the desired result. And that orientation, however carefully concealed beneath the surface of the composed presentation, generates exactly the weight that the genuine calm does not generate. The system reads the orientation, not the presentation. The monitoring detects the monitoring, and the result is not the calming of the avoidance protocol, but the activation of an additional layer of it, the specific, sophisticated, highly accurate detection of someone who is performing rather than being. The genuine calm is available only to someone who has done the internal work of arriving at an actual relationship with their own stability, who has processed enough of their own history, enough of their own fear, enough of their own unmet needs to be present in a relationship without the relationship being the source of their regulation, who can want the connection without needing the connection to maintain their sense of self, who can be affected by the avoidance behavior without being destabilized by it. This is not a small thing to ask of anyone. It is, in fact, the same internal work that the avoidant themselves needs to do. The development of a self that is stable enough to be genuinely present in connection without the connection threatening the stability. The difference is that for the person who loves the avoidant, this work produces the calm that reaches the avoidant in the only way the avoidant can actually be reached. For the avoidant, it produces the capacity to be in a relationship without the management that has been preventing the relationship from being what both people need it to be. There is something worth acknowledging about the asymmetry this creates. The person who loves the avoidant is being asked, by the logic of what actually works, to do significant internal work in order to communicate in the only language the avoidant can receive. This is not fair in any abstract sense of fair. The avoidance limitations are not your responsibility to accommodate at the cost of your own needs and your own authentic emotional expression. The requirement that your love express itself in a specific, self-regulating, carefully calm form in order to reach the person you are offering it to is a requirement that asks something real of you and that deserves to be acknowledged as asking something real. The acknowledgement does not resolve the asymmetry. It simply names it honestly. You are being asked to be calmer than is natural in situations that are not calm, to regulate your own emotional state in the presence of someone whose behavior generates emotions that require regulation, to communicate in a language that requires significant internal development to speak fluently. These are real asks. They are not nothing. What they produce, when they are met genuinely and at the cost of the work they require, is the only consistent access to the avoidant that exists, not a guarantee, not a promise that the calm will produce the opening, that the opening will produce the sustained change, that the sustained change will produce the relationship that all of this is reaching toward, but the ground on which the possibility exists. Without the calm, the possibility is largely closed. The protocol runs, the management maintains the distance. The words, however carefully chosen, however honestly felt, arrive at the surface layer and activate the management rather than reaching the interior. With the calm, genuine, constitutionally grounded, not performed but possessed, the protocol has nothing to run on. The management has nothing to manage. The interior, briefly, in the specific and rare and genuinely extraordinary moments that genuine calm produces, is accessible. Calm is the only language the avoidant understands, not because they are cold, because they were trained long before they had the language to understand the training, that the emotional states of others were weather to be endured and managed rather than connection to be received. Calm is the evidence that the weather has changed, that this person, in this moment, is not a storm requiring management, is simply present, warm, requiring nothing that the avoidant must protect themselves from. And in that simplicity, in that specific, rare, entirely genuine quality of non-demanding presence, the avoidance system, perhaps for the first time, lowers something, not the wall, something smaller than the wall, the vigilance, just briefly, just enough, for something real to get through.